Chapter 5 in AP Environmental is going to deal with evolution and biodiversity, kind of topics that you probably, hopefully, realize from your biology class at one time. I'll review a little bit, thinking about the origins of life, particularly relating it to the geological time scale. Our Earth is about 4.55 billion years old. The first billion years or so was more of a chemical evolution. It's when our Earth was actually forming. We had a very harsh environment. We had methane for an atmosphere and ammonia and sulfur, very harsh chemicals that would not promote life today. But eventually what happened is as small molecules started forming in the seas, eventually about 3.7 billion years ago we saw our first prokaryote, which is a bacteria, forming most likely in a hydrothermal vent at the bottom of the ocean, and from there it's just expanded, keeping in mind, of course, that this evolution idea is not an overnight thing. This is millions and millions, if not years, for this change to occur. So first of all, we had that chemical evolution, then we had a biological evolution. As I mentioned, about 3.7 billion years ago, we had the first prokaryotic bacteria. Single-celled eukaryotes evolved from there. We, of course, are eukaryotes. We have advanced cells. We have a nucleus. Multi-celled organisms then evolved off of that. We know this because we have fossil evidence. We can use that magical thing called radioactive half-life. We'll talk about that when we talk about nuclear energy. There's ice core drilling. We can look at chemical analysis. DNA analysis is huge. Now we can tell much better if we could get a little sample of DNA from, let's say, that Iceman that was found in the Alps, which we have done. We can actually compare it to humans today and do an analysis of how closely related we were to that specimen. So taking a look at most recent, Homo sapiens, of course, is the most recent. Looking at this right here, we are about a small snippet of this evolutionary time frame, but unfortunately we've done a lot of damage along with it too. We've had the age of mammals, which flourished after the dinosaurs died out. With the dinosaurs were, of course, the age of the reptiles. When they died out, we had something called adaptive radiation, where mammals absolutely flourished because there was a lack of competition, there was ample resources, and we just took off. So we are a very small snippet in this time frame. Evolution, remember, is a change in a population's genetic makeup over time. We know, for example, our appendix, which is a vestigial structure, we don't need anymore. If one person is born without an appendix, that is not evolution. However, over the course of the next couple 100,000 years, if our appendix continually gets smaller and smaller and non-functional, that's evolution. Eventually, our populations probably will be born without an appendix because we don't simply need it anymore. We cook our food. Theory of evolution is we all came from a common ancestor, and we can really prove that now with DNA analysis, molecular comparisons of amino acid sequences, and things of that nature. Microevolution, there's microevolution, there's macroevolution. Microevolution is a change in a gene pool over time, basically change in a gene pool frequency over time. Genetic variability is key. You want to have great variability within a population of species. Let's take frogs, for example. Let's say we have brown frogs and we have green frogs, and for whatever reason all the vegetation gets cleared out of an area. Well, what's going to happen is those green frogs are going to go bye-bye because they are very easily seen by their predators, and their brown frogs are going to remain. What happens then is the brown frogs reproduce, and of course that brown gene is passed on and on and on. That's microevolution. We have sexual reproduction, which is the randomization of alleles. This is significant too because it gives us that genetic diversity. If something reproduces asexually, of course it's more or less a clone or a copy of itself. If there's some bad genes intertwined in there, that species is going to become extinct. Whereas with sexual reproduction, like humans go through, we can eliminate those bad recessive genes. Mutations can be bad, actually can be good too. The idea that we now see color is thought of as being a very significant mutation along our genetic history, or evolutionary history, where our rods, which see black and white, evolved or changed into seeing color, aka our cones now, so they can be good. Natural selection, members of a population that have favorable traits are passed on. That's what I kind of gave as an example of the green frog, brown frog idea. We must have variability. Those traits must be heritable. So, evolution is a great thing, but if you can't pass that good trait on to your offspring, it's deemed pretty much useless. Must allow for further offspring. That's differential reproduction. Differential reproduction is leaving as many offspring as possible. The more successful offspring a species has, the more genetically and fit they are. Adaptive traits or adaptations, heritable traits that help organisms survive. Possible options, so if we don't evolve, if a species cannot evolve fast enough to meet their environmental needs, and keep in mind that it's really the environment that drives all this. Our oxygen concentration right now is 21%. Let's say, hey, for example, it shoots up to like 40%, and our bodies right now can't handle that. Let's say that it occurs over the next million years. If we do not evolve toward that, what's going to happen is we are going to become extinct as a species. So possible options are you either adapt, you migrate away from that environmental change, or of course you become extinct. Basically, summed up, genes mutate, individuals are selected, and of course populations evolve with this. Coevolution is a very cool thing. Interactions between species can result in microevolution. Coevolution is two species drive each other to evolve. The classical example is a moth versus a bat. Bats obviously are the predators to the moth, and what happens is the bats use echolocation and they send out this clicking sound that a moth can actually hear that frequency. Well, the moths that actually can hear it are the ones that survive because they dodge that predator of the bat diving at them, trying to eat them, but the ones that cannot hear that clicking sound are the ones that get eaten. So AKA we pass on that favorable trait of being able to pick up the clicking sound. So what's happened is the bat has changed their frequency of this clicking sound. So accordingly, the moths have had to evolve and change that sense that can pick up that clicking sound. So they're driving each other to evolve. Niches and adaptations. An ecological niche or niche, however you want to pronounce it, is really a species way of life, everything that affects it. Think about everything you do during the course of the day. It's basically everything except habitat. Habitat is where you live. This is how you get food. This is how you camouflage yourself. This is if you're a predator or you're a prey. Where you are on the food chain is related to this. It includes any adaptations you have, your range of tolerance. What kind of temperature can you tolerate as a species? The role of the energy flow, so where you are in the food chain is a part of this niche. Basically everything that affects a species' survival and reproduction. What I would tell you is your niche is more or less a student. So going to school and learning is kind of your niche, your job, your role. Maybe you have a job that you go to after school, or you're in sports or something like that. That's all part of your niche. Again, everything except where there's something called the fundamental niche, which is a full range of physical, chemical, and biological conditions and resources available without competition. Ooh, that's a mouthful. What that means is everything is available to you. You have absolutely no competition. If you wanted to go out to eat on Blue Mound Road and every restaurant was wide open and you could get in, all the food was free, everything, on a Friday night, you had first choice at everything, that would be your fundamental niche. You would have access to everything. Is that realistic? No. A realized niche is much more realistic. On a Friday night, Blue Mound Road, good luck getting into a restaurant at about 7 o'clock. It's much more realized. It only occupies part of a fundamental niche. Now, where this comes into play with ecology is that some animals have great competition. A pine tree, for example, in your yard may have dozens of birds living in it. They don't all live in the same part of that tree. They actually resource partition that out, and that's called resource partitioning, of course. So what happens is, due to competition, they kind of spread out a little bit. That's a little bit more realized. You don't have all the available resources possible. There is competition. Your habitat, of course, as I've mentioned, is where an organism lives. It's your conditions and resources it needs to live. So what temperature do you need? What amount of moisture do you need to live? All those components that come into play with habitat. Couple things. There's going to be two types of niche species, and this is really important to this class. There's something called the generalist and something called the specialist. A generalist is a very broad ecological role. We as humans are generalists. We eat a wide variety of food. We live in a wide variety of climates. That's a really good thing, because if everybody in a cold climate got wiped out, that would not wipe out our species. We'd still have those species that are in the warm environment survive. So we can live in a variety of places, eat a variety of food, we can adapt very easily. Mice, rats, deer, humans are examples of generalists. The opposite is a specialist, and I've got a little picture here of some birds particularly. Let's focus on this guy right here, which is a pink flamingo. He's a great example of a specialist because a pink flamingo only eats shrimp. Of course, the story behind them is they're born white, and what happens is they eat so much shrimp they become pink. Now, they live in a very specific environment, very small range, and what happens is if that environment gets wiped out or if their food source gets wiped out, they're done. They become extinct. So these species that are specialists are very prone to extinction. Competition may cause them to evolve. Tiger salamanders, giant pandas, of course, are examples. Pandas only eat bamboo, which is a very limiting factor because if that bamboo gets a disease, for example, and wipes out, bye-bye to all those. Couple things about adaptations. This is what Darwin's finches were all about. When Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, of course, he studied finches, and he realized, look at the different beaks. This one right here, of course, is a great example of one that's going to eat seeds. This one right here is going to eat nectar, how it's shaped. So what happened is they had a common ancestor, and we know this through DNA study now, and they all evolved a little separately. This is called divergent evolution. This one right here, of course, their beak is significantly different than this one right here. It's because of what they eat. Again, they're separating out their resources, so there's addition. Gene pool and reproduction rate. Only traits that can adapt are those available in our gene pool. Your gene pool are all the genes that you have available to you as a species. Genetically diverse species that reproduce quickly adapt quickly also. So those species that tend to produce the most offspring, like mosquitoes and bacteria and flies and fruit flies and things of that nature, tend to be the ones that adapt pretty quickly because they have so many offspring, and chances are with thousands of offspring, some are going to have some favorable traits that are then passed on, and they can survive in an environment. Populations that reproduce slowly take a long time to adapt through natural selection, and unfortunately those are the ones that tend to become extinct. So this whole idea of evolution, it's concerned about leaving the most descendants, not necessarily the strongest. A lot of times you hear, oh, the strongest survive, and that. No, not necessarily. It's those that leave the most offspring, and those offspring have the traits then that allow it to pass on their traits successfully to their offspring. So really, fitness is a measure of reproductive success. The more fit a species is, the more successful genetically and evolutionarily they are. All right, that's part 1, chapter 5. We'll do part 2 soon.